Hi everyone, Jenny with On Fire Fit, and welcome to another episode of shoe review and hosiery review. Today we are talking about how not to be disappointed. But first, let's look at the shoes and the hosiery. Okay, I am going to do more of a review later on, and I will do it with and without the hosiery, but these hosiery are from a brand called Geo. I will talk about that a little bit more later. And the heels are by Jennie. I have a black pair, a tan pair. You've seen the caffeine in me. It's making my I'm not as stable. I guess I had one extra cup of coffee this morning. But these are a beautiful pair of red Jennie, and I think they're really pretty. These are size 7. My other pair, my tan pair, is a 7, and my black is a 6.5. So just kind of depends. You can adjust the strap, but it will, stay on your heel or not, depending on, how you adjust that strap. But we will talk more about that later. And so let's go have a little chat, and then I will take you to shoe review and hosiery review. I was talking to a friend about some things that I had on my mind, and I think that it's so interesting when you look at our mind and how we process things and how much that affects our lives. And a lot of times we think that the way people act or the behaviors that people have towards us somehow dictate or control our lives to a greater degree than they actually should or have to. And one of the things that I have kind of explored as far as people and also with God is when we are disappointed, what is going on with that? And I believe that it has so much to do with our expectations. So I know that a lot of times, like when I was raised or when I have been raising my children, you want to have high expectations so that they work hard, work for something. They have kind of goal-oriented behaviors. You usually rise to the level of your expectation. If you have no expectation, or even to the extent that my mom was really good about this, never saying like to a child or to one of us, you're just a pig, you're just lazy, because people tend to rise to that level. And if you don't want that self-fulfilling or your projection onto them, that prophecy to happen, then don't be saying those kinds of things. But I noticed that a lot of times our disappointment and our attitude is because we've had certain expectations of people or of God, and we feel let down. We feel like that has kind of been the thing that has dictated whether or not we are able to move ahead in life, or we are able to love them, or we are able to just have the right attitude towards them. And you even see it out there in some of the quotes that people put out there, and it's like, if you don't treat me well, I won't treat you well, and that type of thing. And I think that the problem with that attitude is you're allowing all of these external factors to dictate your behavior and your character. And I think in relationships, this is a big deal, and it could be life-changing if you really took it to heart. I kind of have two different thoughts on this. One being that anytime I start to see, let's just use my husband as an example. anytime I start to see something that is annoying or irritating, or I wish he would do this or whatever, and then he doesn't do that thing, and I feel disappointed, it's because I had an expectation. Sometimes I've actually told him. A lot of times I have not told him, but I had this sort of unwritten expectation that he never knew about. He does tell me all the time that I don't do that to him, that I don't expect him to know what I'm thinking. However, I think we still all, to a certain degree, have a certain expectation of the other person. And when they don't meet up to that, we feel disappointed. And it can be a bit dangerous for two reasons. One is, I believe that if we are always looking to somebody else's behavior to help our behavior be right, it's going to be a moving target. Some days it's going to be on and some days it's going to be off, and it's not going to give you any sense of peace. If you have a sense of, this is my character, this is how I am, and these are the understandings that I have about myself, that I think makes a huge difference. So for me, if I have that kind of attitude about my husband, if I give myself even a minute to consider how I fall short with him, and I start to check off all the boxes of what I could or should be doing, all of a sudden his one little thing does not look so significant. And I think that the grace that we tend to give ourselves, if we could give it to the other person, it would make a huge difference. Because I know, at least in my marriage with him, he is a really hard worker. He's super supportive, and he does so much to take care of our family that if there's any little thing that might be amiss, I have 10 of them that he could point out, which he doesn't, thankfully. But I think that this again goes back to our expectations. And then if we have an expectation and we forget that we have a whole lot of things that we have wrong with us, it is very dangerous to put that expectation on somebody else. So one thing is just a perspective of, whoa, where am I falling short? And I don't need to be like picking apart the other person. And the other part is just to know that if you do have certain things that you really hope for the other person to try to do more of, or be more of, or do less of, or whatever, if you can have a really good conversation of, for example, there was a time when my husband, when I would talk to him, he would be looking at his phone, and he would say, well, I can multitask. And he would, just keep looking at his phone while I was talking. And, a lot of times he didn't really process what I was saying, and he didn't really have a response back to my question, because he might have been hearing it, but he wasn't really taking it in. And then there were other times that he actually was able to listen, but it just didn't make me feel heard. And so I told him, one day, even if you feel that you can listen to me while you're on your phone, it would make me feel better if you would just set your phone down and look at me. And if it's not a good time because you're doing work or there's something pressing, then just tell me. Like, I have no problem with that. But I don't feel heard when you're doing that. And so even if you feel like you're hearing me, it's not meeting my need. And he got really good about modifying that behavior when he heard me say it in that way. From time to time, he will still be on his phone when I'm talking to him, and I'll usually just stop and go about doing my whatever else I'm doing. And he will usually be like, what were you talking, what did you want to say? And I'll be like, no, it just tell. And I don't cop an attitude, and I really don't have an attitude about it, because I figure if something is that important on his phone, then whatever I'm saying can wait. So, but more times than not, he will just set his phone down and listen. Once in a while, we will pause what I had to say and wait for another time. But if you don't tell the person the expectation that you have, then it's really not fair to be disappointed when they don't meet that expectation. And rather than just being a nag about something, if you can let them know how this makes me feel, then that sometimes is enough for them to take that to heart and to want to make a change or to do something in a way that makes you feel more loved. You also are going to sometimes run into situations, people that really don't care what your expectations are, or they're kind of unaware of themselves, and they will continually not meet your expectations. So what do you do at that point? Well, my best peace comes when I maintain my same character no matter what the other person does. So if they're not doing their part and I choose to keep doing my part, I have not let somebody else erode my character, cause me to stoop to a level that makes me feel bad. Because, it's that old saying, two wrongs don't make a right. If they're acting in ways that are disappointing, and then I act disappointing toward myself as to how I'm acting, it all it does is make me feel worse. And so sometimes you just have to have the boundary and say, these are my expectations. And, obviously it depends on the relationship, but like with kids, these are the expectations. And if you don't meet them, then there is a consequence. Sometimes it's in a relationship with a friend or somebody else, and they just continually don't meet that expectation. Depending on what it is, the relationship may not be able to survive. Or maybe you're in a situation where you have to always be tied to that person. It's your, parent or your sister, or, it's not like you're never going to see or talk to them again. And I think in those situations, if we stop having an expectation of them that they clearly cannot deliver, but we allow ourselves to maintain our own expectations of ourselves, then we can kind of go through life, and a lot of these things that come at us don't have to rock our world. And again, going back to the other aspect of it is remembering that we've all fallen short. We all have character issues and flaws and things that need to be fixed. So anytime we are feeling really rotten towards somebody else, the quickest way for me to flip that is for me to look at where have I disappointed them, and all of a sudden that humbles me. That's why being humble and having a humble attitude can dissolve a lot of problems. So these things sometimes also turn into expectations we have of God, and then we get disappointed, and people will leave relationships with God, they will leave church or whatever, because they had a certain expectation of the way certain, how people should behave or how they should act or whatever. And or they think God should act a certain way, and so then they get disappointed. And I think sometimes that perspective really works against us too, because first of all, if it's disappointment towards God, and we think that we see the full picture, knowing He is supreme, sovereign, and knows all, then we're being a little presumptuous to say, well, I expected you to do this, and now I'm disappointed. If we were able to humble ourselves before Him and say, I don't understand it, but I know you do. And so I'm just going to wait on you. I'm going to be expectant for good, even when bad comes, because sometimes bad comes at us because of the evil in the world. And sometimes it comes because it's going to refine us and make us better. No matter what it is, if you are a child of God, he can use it all for good if we choose to allow him to. And so a lot of those expectations of how things should turn out, if we really look at them from a trusting standpoint with God, then we don't need to be disappointed in any of our circumstances. We can be expectant that he will make good come into our lives, even if it started off looking like a bad thing. If it's a disappointment we had with the church or religion or whatever the case is, that is a big, big, big issue. There is so much inner fighting between denominations, between religions. There's so much pride and arrogance and things like that. That is not a reflection of God. That's a reflection of people and how people tend to be. And people tend to be cliquey. And no matter if you're in a religious setting, school setting, work setting, people tend to be cliquey. And that's not something to blame on God, but it is human nature to a certain extent, which really brings us back to, I would rather talk about relationship with God than religion and what religion you should follow and and all the rules and all of that, because there is so much that people fight about that is not pertinent to eternity or salvation. Even some of the stuff that I will scroll through when I'm looking to listen to like a YouTube video or something, and I've talked about this before, but it really, really, really annoys me when one Christian bashes another Christian and kind of undoes or tears apart things that they talk about. Because I think, if we kind of consider the fact that we're all God's children, and more than likely the person is doing what they believe is right, go to them on a personal level and ask them about it if you have an issue, but don't just bash them publicly on a YouTube video. I don't know, sometimes I just feel it's all for drama, or it's very disconcerting to me, because we should be building each other up and lifting each other up. Even sometimes the pastors and the people in the church that fall because of sin, and they are just lambasted by all kinds, like you just see video after video from all different Christian and see, this is why you shouldn't be a part of that church and and it's like, I'm not saying that those people did right, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't have to, fix whatever as a leader in the church. But it's just interesting how many times people act like their sin is cleaner than somebody else's sin. And rather than going to that person, ministering to them in love, trying to help them to come back to like a restored place where they don't feel like an outcast, we've as a society, we're so quick to tear down and attack. And I think that our expectations for certain people are that they're going to be this certain way, and they're not idols, they're not God, they are not infallible. And there was a monk that wrote a book, and I believe it's Practicing the Presence of God, and I believe he was the one that said this, and I think it's Brother Lawrence. I could be wrong quoting this, but I loved that book. But his attitude, which this goes totally to this expectation situation, he's, being a monk, you're very much separated from a lot of society and a lot of the junk of the world. But whenever he would encounter things that were not good out there in the world. His attitude was, I'm really surprised that we're not worse off than we are. I'm really surprised that people don't act worse than they actually do. Knowing how sin ridden we are, knowing how easy it is for us to fall to our flesh and everything else, he's like, I'm surprised there's any good in this world. And obviously the reason that I believe there is because God is still working through all of us. And there's a reason that we have hearts that are able to change and minds that can be renewed. It's because we still have a God that sits on the throne. And so I think, his expectation was not that everybody out there just be nice. He was just surprised that people weren't worse. And I thought, well, isn't that a breath of fresh air? Because then your expectations are not that everybody's going to behave perfectly. You're kind of like, yeah, I'm actually glad when people act in a certain way that feels more loving, because it just reminds me God is still at work. So I hope that, in your relationships, and I'm doing this for myself, I told you I talk about things that I'm working on. It is not me saying I've already figured it out and I'm on the other side and now I'm your teacher. We all have expectations of people that sometimes are not realistic. Sometimes we have not made it clear in a positive, uplifting, personal way, so that then it's not even fair to be disappointed. Sometimes we have had expectations of people, and when they disappoint us, then we stoop to that and we start acting rotten, and then we feel rotten. And so our own expectations of ourselves, we disappoint ourselves, and then again with God. And so I think if you have any of those little things going on subtly in your relationships out there, between spouse, loved ones, friends, what have you, maybe give some thought to where that expectation is, so that you won't be disappointed all the time. You won't feel let down, and that your own personal character and strength would be built up no matter what is going on around you. Sometimes we're going to outgrow people, because if we don't just let our behavior erode us, then we're going to keep building and building and building. And sometimes that means that you outgrow some of the relationships for other people that aren't willing to do the same or whatever. But I think that we can't look at other people's behaviors and expect a certain thing and then let that affect us in a way that will cause us to go down. So I hope that gives you some food for thought. I always love to hear back from you. Thank you for listening through. We're going to do a shoe and hosiery review now. Father God, you are so good. You came to step into our place so that we would be able to overcome all of this junk of the world. Thank you that you sent Jesus, and his mighty name is where every knee bows and where we humble ourselves. And thank you for humbling yourself even to the point of death to save us. I just marvel at the thought of that miracle, and that I never wanted that to get old. So thank you for doing that for us. Help us in our relationships where we might have expectations, and that we could kind of see it maybe with new eyes, that we might have a different perspective, that we would have more grace with other people, that we wouldn't allow their behavior to change our behavior in a negative way, that we would remain stable, and that we would make positive change in the world, even through our relationships with each other. So I thank you and praise you for all that you do in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Okay, let's take a look. As I said, I will do the shoe review with and without the hosiery. This pair of hosiery is by Geo, and it's a company from England. They make full fashion hosiery stockings, and really beautiful. Their stockings are made on like old-fashioned machines, and I love that. There's just something about mass production and cheaply made things that, you know, I think at some point in your life you just kind of like things that are maybe made in a more classic way. So these are stockings, so you have to wear a belt with it, and I believe they're either white or cream, but they have the back seam, and I'm gonna zoom out here in a second for you to see. But these have a reinforced, make sure I'm not flashing anybody, the toe and the Cuban heel. And you know, I know some people wouldn't wear hosiery with heels that are open, but it's also a style. It's a, you know, kind of like a retro, maybe more classic, vintage type of style. So I have a friend who is, you know, more familiar with vintage style and has kind of told me about that style, and I think it's kind of fun. It gives you just a, I don't know, kind of a classy feeling anyway. So yes, love these. Let me zoom out so you can see the back seam better. Okay, so are my lines straight? I'm always paranoid about my lines, but yeah, they're so pretty. And when, you know, when wearing stockings, there's a little more give to the material than other types of hosiery sometimes. So sometimes there's just a little bit of like a looser fit around the knee or whatever, but that's okay. And I think they're really pretty. Okay, now the review of the shoe without the hosiery. These are Jennie. It is a size 7. I am a 6.5 typically. So the strap is a little loose. I can adjust it, and it seems to make a difference when it's a little shorter for me, you know, when I adjust it. I don't really, I have a lot of shoes where the heel doesn't stay on all the way, and it doesn't really bother me. But yeah, I mean, really depending on, you know, your comfort, you can either leave it a little large or you can keep the strap a little bit tighter. But yeah, I think that they're beautiful. I love that color of red anyway, and they're just really beautiful shoes. So I will wear these with dresses. I'll wear them the way that I did for the video. I'll wear them with jeans. I would wear them with shorts. I would wear them not to work. Can't wear them to work. But other than that, I think everything else, you know, I'd be able to wear them. So yeah, I think they are gonna definitely get good use. If you have depending on your size, I would probably go up a half a size from your normal, because across here might be too tight for you if you're kind of in between. Both shoes, the 6.5 and the 7 in this brand, fit me fine, but I have kind of a narrow to regular size foot. And if you're a little bit wide, it might be too tight for you here if you get your true to size. So that's what I would recommend. And then just adjust the strap for your heel. Okay. And here is the no hosiery. So give a good glimpse of the shoe.